Hey friends, Shane here, and I wanted to make a follow-up video. It's been about 2 weeks since I posted last, and I know that video was uncharacteristically serious and maybe even a little emotional for the type of content that I usually post. And I make no apologies for that. There were things that I think needed to be said and questions that needed to be asked and still need to be asked. And it ultimately led to some really productive conversations. So again, I'm not sorry. But I did want to kind of, like I said, update everyone on kind of where my head has been since that night. In the wake of posting that video about, what good is witchcraft when the world is a giant raging dumpster fire, right? When black people are being murdered and trans people are being murdered and there's just general chaos and, coronavirus is running rampant. Like, what good is it being a witch? And is it our place to do magic to correct the world's ills? And if so, should we be doing it right now? And if so, what should we be doing? And is it our moral responsibility to do these things? And I have been thinking about it, and I've been talking about it. I actually had 2 really amazing, video conference calls. Life during quarantine, am I right? One with my own coven, and one with a small group of coven leaders in the U.S. and for my tradition. And there's a couple things that we landed on. So again, like I said, just wanted to bring you guys up to speed and let you know what my thought process has been. So one of the things that I've been thinking about are the limitations of magic. And I was, like I said, I was on that call with a couple of my peer coven facilitators. And one of them said something to the effect of, magic has no limitations. I get that in an abstract kind of way. I don't know if I agree with it 100% in a practical way. Like I said in my last video, I absolutely believe in the power of magic when it comes to, drawing romance to us or drawing prosperity to us or making our resume stand out in a pile of similarly qualified resumes to a job recruiter, right? I think we can do incredible things with magic. I think we can do incredible internal magic, right? And really live powerful and transformative and meaningful lives with magic. It's not always about material gain, but there's nothing wrong with material gain. Whole other video. I do recognize that there is, we always say like science and magic are not at odds. They're not enemies. They work probably in tandem more often than we realize and in more complex ways than we can currently comprehend. And that means magic does have limits. I can be a, top tier spellcaster. I can be a 25th degree high muckety muck, initiations in 12 different traditions. If I step out a 6th-floor story window, I will plummet to my grisly death. Gravity is a thing. So, it doesn't matter how good my magic is. Magic has limitations. So, again, I've just been thinking, but we had a great conversation on that topic, and my coven had a great conversation. And honestly, one of the things my coven and I landed on is we do not want to do magic for the Black Lives Matter movement or any of these other kind of social justice issues as a way to feel better about ourselves. This isn't, one of my initiates put it so brilliantly. He said, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said something to the effect of, I don't want this to be the Wiccan equivalent of thoughts and prayers. I don't want us to just do some spell work so we can feel better, so we can pat ourselves on the back, so that we can think, okay, we did something and now we get to rest on our laurels. And I commend him for that. That is absolutely true. I feel the same way. I know a lot of other people feel the same way. And I, I'll be vulnerable and say, I can 300% see why he would be afraid of that. I could see that being a potential pitfall for a lot of people. I'm not immune from that. Saying, okay, I did the work and now I don't have to do anything else. My contribution has been made. When in reality, something as huge and massive and ingrained in us as systemic racism, cannot be solved with one ritual, no matter how cool it is or how many people participate or how many covens participate. And it cannot be, wrapped up before the next season or the next Sabbath or by the end of the year. This is the work of a lifetime. It's like unpacking our own internal biases. It's the work of a lifetime. There's no quick fix for it. So I was really grateful that he pointed that out and that we had that discussion. So where we landed that night on our own coven call was to, we brainstormed a little bit on what magic to support the Black Lives Matter movement and these other similar issues would look like. Because it's all well and good to say, well, we want to do magic that ends racism. Sure, that's laudable. What does that mean? What does that look like? That's a pretty fuzzy, airy-fairy goal, right? To end racism. To bring about justice. What? That's not terribly specific. And one of the first things that we learn about magic is that it lives and thrives and relies upon specificity. The effectiveness of magic is super often tied to how specific, you can lock it down and make it. That's why spells to be more healthy, to love myself more, to be a better person, they don't work. Sorry, not sorry. They don't work. They're not specific. Similarly, we can't work magic to, support Black Lives Matter, end racism, systemic racism, until we address what it is, what it looks like, what it feels like, smells like, tastes like, and the exact changes that we want to see occur. To say that we just want to do magic to end systemic racism is like saying, that's like me telling you, I want you to visualize a room without an elephant in it. What? Like, first of all, all you're doing now is thinking about an elephant. Secondly, magic doesn't do super well with negatives. I was having this conversation with another friend last week who is getting married in September and is understandably and necessarily concerned about the effect that the pandemic is going to have on, on her big day that she's waited her whole life for. And, none of us have ever thought about our wedding reception with, people dancing and eating cake and wearing masks. That's not something that, any of us visualized when we thought about our big day, right? So, we were talking about a great number of things, and something she said was, she was like, magic doesn't understand the word no. So when we were talking about magic to support various things, it's not about no racism or no face masks or no coronavirus, because magic isn't going to hear the negative, right? And it's about reframing and rephrasing a lot of our magic to get more specific and to get at the core of what it is we really need. So in having that conversation with my coven, we brainstormed a couple of smaller bite-size pieces of magic that could and maybe should be done instead of magic to end racism. And here is just a short list of examples. They're just examples. Your mileage may vary. You may decide to do them. You may decide to do something else entirely. All those things are valid. But when we were talking about, like I said, potential pitfalls, good ideas, We thought about prosperity for the bailout funds and for the legal defense funds to make sure that they had a surplus of monies kind of attracted to them so that they were able to meet all of their local needs. We talked about magic to specifically weed out corrupt cops, corrupt politicians, people who do not have the temperament or the skill set or the right people to be in those careers and to be making those decisions and those taking those actions. We talked about getting specific with bills and laws and proposals to get passed or to find their way onto the ballot. And again, when I say specific, I mean, specific names or numbers of these bills. Like I said, we're talking hard and fast specifics, not some kind of wishy-washy, and I hope they pass a bill to hold people accountable. It's meaningless. Sorry. We talked about SelfWork to get the officers implicated in the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other people, anyone implicated in those deaths, prosecuted to the fullest extent that the law allows. Again, I'm not saying we did this magic or didn't do this magic, but this was to the level of specificity that we discussed. Again, instead of holding, law enforcement accountable, we said that the magic would have to look like these names, these dates, these examples. Drawing the right kind of people to law enforcement careers. Kind of self-explanatory. SelfWork aimed at our own internal biases. Again, we each have to do our part in dismantling the systems of white supremacy and patriarchy and systemic racism. Regime change begins at home. You have to change what you're doing in here before you can change it on the macrocosm, right? The microcosm first and then the macrocosm. Before we can kind of point the finger elsewhere and before we can take a look on the outside, first we have to take a look on the inside. That's critically important work, and that never ends. So we discussed magic and SelfWork to support, that process. And then we talked about magic to support the judge or jury selection in these trials. And another Coven member brought up a really interesting point. He talked about, basically he kind of divided it into two types of magic. So he said, there's magic we can support on the material plane and should, because that's just good magical theory, magical etiquette, magical practice in general. And then there's magic that we can't have an impact on the material plane. So we can do magic to support the bailout funds. And then once we are done with that spell work, the very first thing we should do to kind of kick it off is to write a check or to send a donation to get the ball rolling. And that really supports that work right here and now on the material plane and kind of marries those two realities together. And that's a beautiful thing. Just like if you were going to do, magic to find a job, hopefully the very next morning after waking up from that ritual, the first thing you do is send your resume out and start filling out applications. We're not expecting magic to do all the heavy lifting, are we? That just seems silly. So there is magic that we can support by voting, by writing and calling our, elected representatives, by sending money, by signing petitions. And then there's magic that we can't touch, right? Like, we are not going to be in the room selecting that jury. So I thought that was really interesting of my coven mate to kind of break that down into two categories. And again, these were first steps. We, whether or not we landed on performing any of these rituals, I wouldn't say, because I don't want to unduly influence anyone, and I wouldn't say because of kind of precepts of magical secrecy, right? But I thought it was a conversation worthwhile having, like I said, just from a brainstorming point of view, just to get a bunch of people to sit down and say, no. Again, like I said in my last video, what is actually reasonably, practically actionable? What can we have an impact on as witches? Someone else who does this really, really well, who I loved his idea. You can follow him on Twitter and or Instagram at the Velis. I'm probably pronouncing that terribly. And do you like I don't know how to do captions or, any kind of lettering or graphics on these videos because my editing skills are still trash. So this is my real high-tech, fancy, index card and Sharpie marker, but give him a follow. See what he's been doing. He's been posting his work on Instagram and Twitter, and he broke it down into 7 days using planetary energies. So one day was like to send love and healing to the grieving family members of the deceased. One day was to weed out the corruption and hold people accountable. And so he had broken it down into 7 different little bits of spell work, and I loved it so much. We're friends in the real life, but I had hit him up and I was like, please, can I borrow this? Can I send this to my own coven and show them, like, hey, other people are thinking about what we're thinking about, talking about what we're talking about, have come up with solutions, and other people, like, are not content to, like, change their social media avatar to a black square for a single day and then think, they've done everything that they can do, and then they go back to their normal lives. Because again, there's no more going back to our normal lives anymore. That's it. You're taking up this, I hate to call it a cause. It's kind of, it minimizes and really reduces the plight of the people who are living this experience daily. But you're taking this up as part of your personal mission, or you aren't. There's no going backwards in 2020. There's only moving forward. And like I said, I'm going to keep this conversation going. I am also going to return to making, more fun and frivolous stuff, more different content for you guys, because I think balance is key. I think, it can't be all this storm and stress all the time. Sometimes we need to laugh. Sometimes we need to work. There's room in life for both. And there's been a lot of talk about self-care in the wake of this trash fire a year that 2020 has been so far. A lot of people saying, hey, you've got to take a break from the news sometimes. Hey, you've got to do what you can to protect yourself and nurture yourself so that you can keep going and keep fighting. You have to stay mentally healthy. You can't, I love this saying, but it is getting a bit overused. You can't pour from an empty cup. But it's true. It's 300% true. Or people will bring up how, if you've ever been in an airplane and the flight attendant is giving the instructions before takeoff, and they might say, and with a sudden change of cabin pressure, you might notice oxygen masks, pop out of the ceiling compartment. And you should always put on and adjust your mask and get your mask working and then get the oxygen flowing first before you turn and assist the person sitting next to you. And it's kind of the same principle, right? We can't constantly steep ourselves in these terrible pieces of news. We have to balance our desire to stay informed and to stay active and involved in our communities and in this critically important work with our need to stay fucking sane. And I understand that even just by saying that, that I exist in a space of privilege. Okay, I acknowledge that. But, something else, a different kind of analogy that I've been thinking about lately, is playing in an orchestra. And, if you've ever played a musical instrument or if you've ever played in any kind of ensemble, I used to be a brass player. I played trumpet, French horn, some other stuff. to mixed degrees of success. But one of the things they teach you is if you're playing a long note or a long passage is that, you have to breathe. You have to, unless you're really, really super cool and you learn circular breathing, but that's tough and off the topic. You have to breathe at some point. Or if you're singing in a chorus, same principle. You have to breathe at some point. And you're taught to kind of check out the person, standing on the riser next to you to your right and your left, or sitting in the orchestra to your right or left. And as long as you're not breathing when the person next to you is breathing, you're fine. It's called, staggered breathing. And it's done so that the entire orchestra or the entire choir isn't breathing at the same time, and you hear a gasp or a pause in the middle of a musical phrase, right? In the middle of the piece. No one wants to hear that. So you just breathe at a different time as your neighbor. That's it. It's that simple. So again, I recognize that my privilege, my white privilege, and my other kinds of privilege put me in a position where I can breathe at a different place as my neighbor, and I can, fight one day and rest another day, and fight one day and rest another day. And again, it doesn't feel good to admit that I have that because of my privilege, but it's the fucking truth. Some people don't get a break at all, ever. And so if you are in a position of privilege like me, and you are able to fight and take a break and fight and take a break, do it and take care of yourself, but keep coming back. So like I said, this won't be the last video that I make on this subject, but it will be kind of interspersed with other topics, because sometimes you need a break and you just need to laugh at my stupid bullshit. And I need to make stupid bullshit. So I think that's all I have for now. I hope you're all well and safe and taking care of yourselves and donating and signing petitions and getting lots of sleep and eating your vegetables. I do care deeply about you guys. And so until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.